What would you do if the people you raised with love, the ones you gave everything to, suddenly saw you as a burden? And what if I told you that I was abandoned at an airport, like forgotten luggage, by my own son? My name is Estella Margarita Cardozo. I'm 84 years old, and I was born in a small town called San Rafael, in the interior of Argentina. I dedicated my entire life to being a teacher, a mother, and a grandmother. I believe that if I gave love, I would receive love in return. That if I gave everything, I would never be left with nothing. I raised my son, Tomas, alone after his father passed away in an accident when Tomas was just 8. I was mother and father, cook and counselor, friend and guide. I never remarried because I felt my role in life was to take care of him. And when Tomas married Jimena, I welcomed her with open arms. I taught her the family recipes, gave her my grandmother's tablecloths, and celebrated their love as if it were my own. But over time, things began to change. Small comments, small silences, small dismissals. They started to treat me like I was fragile, forgetful, outdated, like an object they didn't know where to place. Still, I never complained. I never demanded anything. Just love, just a little time, just not to be left alone. 2 months ago, Tomas came to me with a surprise. He said we were going to fulfill my lifelong dream, to visit Disney in the United States. I laughed. I thought he was joking, but he showed me the tickets. He told me it was a gift, that he and Jimena had thought it through, that it was my time to enjoy. I packed my suitcase with trembling hands. I chose my best blouses. I even bought a new travel pillow. The morning of the trip, Tomas picked me up. He loaded the luggage into the car, took a picture with me in front of the house, and drove us to the Mendoza International Airport. At the terminal, he handed me a folder. Inside was a plane ticket, a reservation at a hotel, and a letter that began with, "Mom, I'm doing this for your own good." He didn't look me in the eye. He said goodbye with a kiss on the forehead. He turned around and walked away. I stood there, alone, among suitcases and strangers, with my heart pounding, trying to understand. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again, and again, and then I read the rest of the letter. They weren't sending me on vacation. They were sending me away to a home for the elderly in Florida, where I would be better off, where I could have more attention, where they could rest. The hotel reservation was only for one night. The next day, a van would pick me up and take me to that residence. I sat on a bench in the airport and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a girl. I cried until my throat closed, until my legs trembled, until the security guard asked if I was okay. But how do you explain that your own son has just erased you from his life? I didn't get on the plane. I didn't go to the hotel. I didn't go to that residence. I took a taxi with the little money I had and returned to San Rafael, to an empty house, to a refrigerator with no food, to bills I didn't know existed, to debts I never accumulated. Tomas and Jimena had not only tried to get rid of me, they had taken everything. And it was in that silence, surrounded by betrayal and cold walls, that I made a decision. I would not disappear quietly. I would not die without telling my story. And I would not allow anyone else to suffer the same. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every grandmother who gave everything and ended up with nothing. If you've come this far and something inside you was moved, I ask you to do this. Leave a comment below saying, I believe in the voices of our grandmothers. Like this video as a sign of respect for women like me. Subscribe to this channel because many of us still have stories to tell, and they deserve to be heard. When I opened the door and stepped back into the house, I felt like I no longer belonged there. It was the same house I had cleaned for years, where I had sewn curtains, baked bread, read bedtime stories. But now it smelled different, cold, like dust and silence, like something sacred had been broken and could never be repaired. The keys no longer turned with the same ease. The lights flickered, as if even the electricity hesitated to return. And the telephone was dead, literally. They had disconnected the landline. I sat on the couch and looked around. Everything was in its place physically, but everything was out of place inside me. I didn't have food. I didn't have cash. I didn't even know how much I had left in my pension account. Because Tomas had been managing my finances to make things easier for me. That's what he always said. Let me handle it, Mom. You don't need to worry about those things anymore. And I believed him. I trusted him. Like a child trusts their parent. Like a mother trusts the son she raised with love and values. Like a woman who never imagined that the people closest to her would be capable of erasing her from her own life. I went to the kitchen and opened the pantry. It was empty. The refrigerator hummed, but there was nothing but a jar of mustard and a half-empty bottle of mineral water. I walked to the bedroom. My jewelry box was gone. My sewing machine wasn't there. The set of porcelain cups I inherited from my grandmother had disappeared. I opened the closet and found only 2 dresses. The rest gone. Even my photos, those old, yellowed ones of my wedding, of Tomas in his school uniform, of Christmases from the 90s had vanished. I sat on the bed, and I cried again. But this time, it wasn't just grief. It was fury. a kind of internal scream I had never felt before. What kind of person erases their mother? I spent the night awake, thinking, turning things over in my head, trying to understand when it had started, when the love turned cold, when I stopped being mom and became an expense. And I remembered a conversation I had with Jimena 2 years ago. We were sitting on the patio, drinking mate. She looked at me and said, casually, "Have you thought about selling the house? It's too big for you now." I laughed. I know it's big, but it's mine, and I feel safe here. She didn't smile back. I just think you could live somewhere smaller, more manageable, with help, in a place with nurses, maybe. I looked at her, surprised. "Jimena, are you trying to get rid of me?" She laughed. No, I'm just thinking of what's best for you. Tomas worries. Now I understand. That wasn't care. That was strategy. Everything had been part of a plan, slow, calculated, dressed up in kindness and false concern. They started by managing my accounts. Then they took over my medical appointments. Then my documents. Then my house. And finally, my voice. Because when you no longer make decisions, when you no longer have access to your money, your papers, your choices, you stop being a person. You become manageable, disposable. The next morning, I went to the bank. I waited in line for over an hour. When I got to the counter and gave my ID, the woman frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This account was closed last week." Closed? Yes. The funds were transferred to another account. In the name of Mr. Tomas Cardozo. I froze. "That's my son." The woman shrugged, with a hint of pity. "I'm afraid you're no longer listed as the primary account holder." I left the bank trembling. My heart was racing, not from fear, from rage. They had emptied everything. Savings from years of teaching, bonuses, retirement funds, gone. They hadn't just abandoned me at an airport. They had robbed me with a smile. That afternoon, I called Marta, an old friend from my school days. She had worked in law for decades. We hadn't spoken in years. "Estella, is that really you?" I broke down. I told her everything, from the trip to the empty refrigerator, from the photos to the bank. She didn't judge me. She didn't pity me. She listened. And then she said, "You need a lawyer. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today." She gave me the contact for Martin, a young attorney specializing in elder abuse and fraud. I called. He saw me the next day. When I arrived at his office, I felt like I was dragging a sack of shame behind me. But he looked me in the eye and said, "What they did to you is criminal. Not just immoral, illegal." I blinked. "But they're my family." He nodded. "That makes it worse, but not less punishable." We spent hours reviewing what I could remember. Dates, transactions, conversations. He asked for any remaining documents. We'll need to act fast before they move everything again. That night, I couldn't sleep, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was resolve, because something inside me had lit up. A small flame, faint, wavering, but real. For the first time in a long time, I felt I was coming back to life. If you're still reading this, it means something inside you recognizes this pain. So don't leave without doing something simple, but powerful. Comment below. No one deserves to be erased like this story to show the world that elder abuse exists. Subscribe to the channel so that stories like mine continue to reach those who need them most. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and paperwork. Martin, the lawyer, came by the house to help gather documents. We sat at my dining room table, which still had burn marks from years of tea kettles and birthday candles. He opened his laptop and began listing every item I remembered losing. Do you have a record of your bank statements? He asked gently. I never kept printed ones. Tomas used to show me everything on his phone. He said it was easier that way. Martin nodded, not judging. That's common. Many cases like yours begin the same way. Trust, delegation, and then total erasure. Those words stung. Total erasure. That's what it felt like. Like someone had pressed delete on my identity. We managed to retrieve some bank movements. Transfers from my account to his. Recurring withdrawals. Even online purchases. I never made furniture. Electronics. Clothes I had never seen. Martin looked at the list and said, "You were financing their lifestyle." And I believed it, because, deep down, I always saw signs, but I ignored them. Jimena showing up with expensive handbags. Tomas with a new car he claimed was a company perk. The private school for the kids. The frequent weekend getaways. The growing number of packages arriving at their house. I thought they were doing well. I felt proud. They're thriving. I used to tell my neighbors I did my job well. Now I knew the truth. They were thriving at my expense. But even with all that evidence, a part of me hesitated. Could I really take legal action against my own son? Wasn't that betrayal? Wasn't I the one breaking the sacred bond of family? That night, I sat on the porch and remembered a conversation with my own mother. Years ago, I was young, maybe 20, and I had just told her about a cousin who had been stealing from his grandmother. She looked at me and said, "A child who robs a parent is already lost, but a parent who covers for it loses herself, too." I hadn't thought about those words in years, but now they echoed with terrifying clarity. If I kept quiet, I wasn't protecting my family. I was protecting a lie. The next morning, I signed the complaint. Martin filed it with the proper court. He requested an injunction to freeze the assets until an investigation could be completed. It was the first real step, and yet I cried as I left the courthouse, because even when you're right, pain doesn't disappear. I cried for the Estella I had been, the woman who thought love was enough, the mother who defended her child in every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee, every failed math test, the grandmother who made homemade jam and personalized birthday cards. I cried for her, and I let her go. Marta accompanied me that day. She brought me empanadas, and we sat in the kitchen, like two old schoolgirls gossiping about a teacher. She held my hand and said, "You're brave, Estella. This isn't betrayal. This is justice." I needed to hear that, because for days the guilt consumed me. What would people say? Would the neighbors think I was being dramatic? Would the church ladies whisper behind my back? But little by little, those fears faded. I realized that I had spent my entire life trying to be good wife, good mother, good neighbor, good Christian, and in doing so, I had stopped being good to myself. No one teaches us that. They teach us to give, to forgive, to tolerate, to endure, but not to say enough, not to draw a line, not to demand respect. The first hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Martin suggested I speak to a social worker and a therapist, both specialized in elder abuse. I laughed. At this age, therapy, he smiled, especially at this age, and he was right. My sessions with Laura, the therapist, became a turning point. I sat in that small room filled with houseplants and incense, and for the first time, I said things I had never dared to say out loud. I feel like garbage. Why? Because I raised a thief, and I let him do it. She didn't flinch. You didn't raise a thief. You raised a son. He made choices. You made love, I sobbed, because I needed someone to tell me that it wasn't my fault, that kindness isn't weakness, that trust isn't a crime. Each session peeled away a layer of shame. I talked about my marriage, about the loneliness of widowhood, about how motherhood became my entire identity, how I didn't know who Estella was outside of Mom. Laura helped me rediscover that woman, the one who loved poetry, the one who painted sunflowers on napkins, the one who used to dream of traveling alone by train, just to feel the wind in her hair. She was still there, buried, silenced, but there, and as I started to write again, to cook, to rearrange furniture, to call old friends, I realized something. I was reclaiming my place in the world, not as an expense, not as a burden, but as a woman with a story. If this part of the story made you feel something, don't keep it inside. Comment below. Being good doesn't mean staying silent like this video. If you believe our elders deserve dignity, subscribe to the channel so that more people learn to say enough. I received the court notice one rainy Tuesday morning. It was folded in half and left sticking out of the mailbox like an uninvited reminder of everything I didn't want to face. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Tomas had been notified. He had the right to defend himself, to bring legal representation, to provide his version. For the first time in my life, I would have to sit across from my son not as mother and child, but as plaintiff and defendant. I stared at the letter for what felt like hours. My hands trembled, not from fear of him, from fear of what I'd feel when I saw him again. Would I cry? Would I want to hug him? Would I break down? Martin called to confirm the date. Are you ready? No, I said honestly, but I'll go anyway. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I made tea. I cleaned the house 3 times. I folded clothes I hadn't worn in years. And then I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to the court, not to Tomas, to myself. It read, Estella, you have the right to be here. You have the right to defend what's yours. You have the right to be heard. You are not ungrateful. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are a woman who gave everything and was left with nothing, and that ends now. I folded the paper and tucked it into my purse. The next morning, I wore my nicest blouse, the blue one, with the little white flowers. I put on the necklace my mother gave me when I turned 50, and I took a deep breath before stepping outside. The courthouse was gray, cold, intimidating. People walked quickly, avoiding eye contact, holding files, whispering. Martin met me at the entrance. He greeted me with a nod and offered his arm. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected, plain. Walls, a wooden table, 3 chairs on each side, and then he walked in. Tomas, my son, my baby, who used to run barefoot through the grapevines, the boy who built a fort in the backyard with old blankets, the teenager who cried when his dog died, but now he looked distant. He wore a suit. His hair was combed perfectly. He didn't look at me. Jimena sat beside him, her expression unreadable. The judge entered. We stood. We sat, and the proceedings began. Martin presented the evidence, transfers, testimonies, statements from the bank, photos of missing valuables, medical reports showing I was fully mentally competent during the transactions. Tomas' lawyer countered. It was all consensual. Estella gave everything willingly, out of love, out of trust. I wanted to scream. Love is not an excuse for theft. Trust is not consent for betrayal. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Cardozo, would you like to say something? My mouth went dry. My heart pounded, but I stood up, and I spoke. Yes, Your Honor, I want to say something. I looked straight at Tomas. He finally met my gaze. For years, I trusted you. I gave you not just my money, but my life. I believed you wanted to take care of me. But now I see you wanted to take control of me. You took my home, my memories, my peace. You tried to send me away like a piece of furniture. And that is not love. That is not family. Silence. Even Jimena looked down. The judge asked if I wanted to settle. No. I want this process to continue. We left the room. The ruling would come later. But I didn't need a judge to tell me what I already knew. I had one, not just the case, my voice. Martin and I went for coffee. I ordered media lunas. He asked if I felt okay. I feel more alive than I have in years, I said. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote. I looked him in the eye, and I didn't break. I am no longer afraid. After the hearing, days passed slowly, but with a strange sense of peace. The anxiety that used to wake me in the middle of the night began to fade. My appetite returned. I started walking again in the mornings, greeting neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Some looked at me with pity, others with curiosity, a few with admiration, and little by little, I realized that something inside me had changed forever. I no longer walked with my head down. I no longer apologized for existing. I no longer lowered my voice out of fear that someone would call me dramatic or ungrateful. I was Estela Margarita Cardozo, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who that was. Martin kept me informed. The investigation was moving forward. There was enough evidence to move into the next phase, asset recovery. But that process would take time. In the meantime, I had to face a more delicate issue: the community. San Rafael isn't a big city. People talk. Whispers travel faster than cars. And when a woman of my age files a lawsuit against her only son, tongues wag. I received a call from Father Ignacio, the parish priest. Estela, can we talk? I agreed. He came to the house 2 days later. He brought a rosary and a tin of cookies. We sat in the garden, under the old fig tree that Tomas had once climbed to pick fruit. Some parishioners are concerned, he said cautiously. I'm not surprised, I replied. They say that maybe this could have been handled privately, that airing family matters in court is unchristian. I looked at him. Father, would Jesus have stayed silent if his temple was being robbed? He didn't respond. I continued. 4 years. I gave and gave and gave. And they took not just things. They took parts of me. And when I asked for help, they closed the door. He lowered his gaze. I understand, Estela. I do. But many people don't know your side. Then maybe it's time they hear it. That same afternoon, I called Yulita, a local journalist who had once interviewed me about my teaching career. I asked if she was interested in hearing my story. She came the next day with a notepad and a tape recorder. We sat for hours. I told her everything, from the first signs to the airport to the courtroom. She listened without interruption. A week later, the headline appeared in the town newspaper. I was treated like a burden, but I am still a person. The testimony of Estela Cardozo, the article went viral. People called. Former students sent letters. Strangers brought food. But not everyone was kind. Some accused me of being vengeful, ungrateful, a troublemaker. And for a second, it hurt. But then I remembered what Laura, my therapist, had said. When you start speaking the truth, it disturbs those who are comfortable in the lie. One morning, I received a message from Jimena. She wanted to meet. I hesitated, but I agreed. We met in a cafe downtown. She looked thinner, tired, nervous. I didn't know it would go this far. She said, "You mean you didn't think I'd fight back?" I corrected her. She looked down. I just thought, it was better this way. Better for whom? Silence. "I never hated you, Estela," she whispered. I didn't want to take care of you." Those words stung, not because I needed care, but because it confirmed everything I feared. I had become a weight. "I didn't ask you to take care of me," I said. "I asked you not to erase me." We parted without hugging. I walked home in silence, and once again I cried, but not for sadness, for clarity. I finally saw her for what she was, not a monster, but a coward. And I saw myself as I truly was, not a victim, a survivor. Martin called with news. A judge had ruled in my favor regarding a portion of the funds. They would begin the process of restitution, slowly, but it would happen. That night, I wrote in my journal. I stood up, and they didn't expect it. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought I'd disappear. But I rose, and I'm still rising. The weeks that followed were quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from emptiness, but from healing. I got used to small routines again. Opening the windows every morning, watering my succulents, preparing soup just for myself, without feeling pathetic for cooking for one. And slowly, I began to rebuild my life, not around what I had lost, but around what I still had. I received a letter from the Ministry of Social Development. They had read the article. They offered to include me in a community support program for elderly women at risk. I didn't need financial support at that point. What I needed was people. So I said yes every Thursday afternoon. I attended a group session with 10 other women between the ages of 70 and 92. Their names were Rosalia, Carmen, Beatrice, Julia, Norma. They told their stories. Some had been scammed, others abandoned, some simply forgotten, and each one, like me, carried invisible bruises on their hearts. That group became my anchor. We laughed, we cried, we painted mandalas, shared recipes, read poetry, danced slowly to old tango songs, and, most importantly, we listened. One day, Rosalia brought a photo of her husband. She hadn't shown it to anyone in years. She passed it around like it was a relic. When it reached me, I held her hand and said he would be proud of the woman you still are. She cried. So did I another day. Carmen taught us how to make alfajors, and while kneading the dough, she whispered, I thought I was useless, but I still have something to teach. We all do, through them. I learned that blood isn't the only bond that matters, that sometimes family is made of those who choose to see you when others pretend. You're invisible. I stopped waiting for Tomas to call. He never did, not even after the judge ordered the restitution. A deposit appeared in my account without a note, a word, a trace of acknowledgement. And strangely, that was a relief, because I no longer needed his apology. I had made peace with the silence. Jimena, too, disappeared from town. Some say they moved to Mendoza. Others say they're still here, hiding behind new routines and old lies. But I didn't chase them. I had spent enough of my life trying to understand those who never tried to understand me. Instead, I focused on writing. I started a notebook called Things I Still Want to Do. On the first page, I wrote, Take a train to the capital visit. The ocean again, learn how to use a smartphone, adopt a cat dance in the rain. Without fear of getting sick, say no. Without guilt, say yes. Without needing permission, live. Without asking to exist every week. I checked one item off the list. The first time I went to Buenos Aires alone, I was terrified. I packed 3 sweaters, 2 books, and my mother's old shawl. At the station, a young man offered to carry my suitcase. I'm not as fragile as I look, I said with a smile, but I let him help anyway. On the train, I sat by the window and watched the world pass by fields, cows, sunflowers, cities, lights, and for the first time in decades, I felt small and enormous at the same time, free, the kind of freedom you don't get from documents or court rulings, but from standing up for yourself when everyone expected you to crumble. In Buenos Aires, I visited museums. I walked through parks. I even took a selfie in front of the Teatro Colón with some difficulty. But I did it. When I returned home, the other women from the group welcomed me like a hero. They had baked a cake Rosalia had printed a diploma that read, "For bravery, resilience, and never letting age define her." I hung it on the fridge. I was proud, not because of the trip, but because I had done something for myself. That night, I wrote, "I am not what they tried to make me. I am not the absence they left behind. I am not a mistake. I am a woman who rose, and I'm not done. Yet, I used to think that dreams were for the young, that the elderly were supposed to settle for memories, that adventures belonged to those with strong legs, fresh hearts, and blank calendars. But the day I found a flyer on my door for a travel agency offering seniors only packages to Orlando, yes, that Orlando, with Disney World and all its magic, I laughed so hard I cried. Not because it was ridiculous, but because a part of me wanted to go. I, Estela Margarita Cardozo, 84 years old, wanted to meet Mickey Mouse. I kept the flyer on the kitchen table for 2 weeks. Each morning, I stared at it while sipping my tea. Each night, I moved it to dust beneath it, then placed it back. One day, I mentioned it during group. Carmen burst out laughing. "Can you imagine us on a roller coaster?" "Why not?" I asked. They all looked at me like I had lost my mind, but something inside me had already decided. So I called the agency. I spoke with a kind young woman named Valeria, who didn't laugh when I told her my age. "I think it's beautiful that you want to go," she said. "Do you have family? Who'd join you?" I hesitated. "No, just me. Even better." She smiled through the phone. "Let's make it your trip." I used part of the restitution money. I renewed my passport. I got vaccinated. I bought new shoes and a lightweight jacket for the Florida weather. When the day finally came, I was shaking, but not from fear, from excitement. I arrived at the Mendoza airport with my suitcase and a heart beating like a drum. But at the check-in counter, something was wrong. The airline had overbooked. They said my seat had been reassigned, that I'd have to wait for the next available flight, that it could be hours or days. I tried to stay calm, but when the flight started boarding, and I saw it was really happening, that the plane I had dreamed about for weeks was taking off without me, I sat on the cold airport bench and cried. But it wasn't just about the flight. It was about everything. All the times I waited. All the times I was left behind. All the times I was told, maybe later, Estela, a young airport worker, saw me. "Are you okay?" "Segura, no." I said honestly, "I'm not." He sat beside me. "I don't know what happened to you, but I can tell you one thing. Planes come and go. But courage like yours, that doesn't land every day." I laughed through tears, and something shifted. I decided not to go home. I spent that night in a modest airport hotel. The next morning, I explored Mendoza like a tourist. I visited the botanical gardens, took photos of murals, bought myself a small silver bracelet that said Valenti, and I realized I didn't need a theme park to feel magic. The magic was in me. That weekend, I called Valeria and rebooked the trip for 2 months later. But this time, I wasn't chasing a destination. I was celebrating the fact that I dared to try. The group women threw me a mock Bon Voyage party. Rosalia made mouse ears out of black felt. Beatrice brought popcorn. Norma wrote me a card that read, "You're not chasing youth. You're teaching us how to age with fire." That night, I wrote, "I missed a flight, but I didn't miss the moment." My heart took off even if the plane didn't. I landed in Florida on a cloudy afternoon. The air was humid, thick, like it wanted to wrap around you. The airport buzzed with voices in languages I didn't recognize, and for a moment, I felt smaller than ever. But then I remembered the girl I used to be, the girl who dreamed of faraway places, the girl who believed that beyond the mountains of San Rafael, there was a world of color and light, the girl who loved fairy tales, even if life didn't give her a happy ending. And I walked forward. I wasn't there for a spectacle. I was there for a promise I had made to myself. The travel agency had booked me into a modest hotel just outside the Disney complex. Nothing fancy, but to me, it felt like a palace. There was a pool, fresh fruit for breakfast, and a young receptionist who called me ma'am with such warmth that I almost cried. The next morning, I entered the park. I held the ticket like a golden invitation. I crossed the gate like a child at her first birthday. People rushed past with strollers, ears on their heads, balloons in their hands. I didn't run. I walked, slowly, absorbing every sound, every color, every smell. Children laughed, mothers argued, teenagers took selfies, and in the middle of it all, there I was, a woman of 84, wearing sunblock and comfortable shoes, finally living a moment she never thought possible. I didn't ride roller coasters. I didn't chase autographs. I sat on a bench in front of Cinderella's castle, and I watched. And suddenly, I cried, not out of sadness, but because I saw a father holding his daughter on his shoulders. And for a second, I imagined that could have been Tomas and me many years ago. In another life, that brief, fleeting thought pierced something deep, but I didn't let it ruin the day. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and bought myself a souvenir, a snow globe with tiny fireworks that lit up when shaken. I carried it like a trophy. Later that evening, I joined a small group tour that included other seniors from Latin America. That's where I met Dowalisha from Ecuador and Loop, a widow from Texas who spoke more Spanish than English and had a laugh that could shake the moon. They invited me to dinner. We talked about our lives. Dowa Alicia had survived breast cancer twice. Loop had lost her home during a flood and rebuilt everything from scratch. They weren't tourists. They were warriors. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the odd one out. We stayed in touch even after the trip. We sent postcards, voice notes, Christmas cards, because sometimes the family we find by accident is the one that truly saves us. On my last day in Florida, I visited the beach. I took off my shoes and let the water touch my feet. The ocean was warm, welcoming, endless, like life. When you stop being afraid of it, I scooped a little sand into a bottle to bring home. And as I looked at the horizon, I whispered, I'm still here. Not because someone brought me, not because someone allowed me, but because I chose to be. That night, I wrote in my journal, I didn't come to Florida to see Mickey Mouse. I came to prove to myself that I was still alive, and I did. When I returned to San Rafael, the group threw another party. This time, they wore paper crowns. They sang an off-key version of When You Wish Upon a Star. And Carmen hugged me tighter than ever and said, You brought a piece of the magic back with you. Maybe I did. But the real magic wasn't in the parks or parades. It was in discovering that even after all I had lived, even after all I had lost, there was still joy waiting for me in places I never imagined. There is a moment in every woman's life when she looks in the mirror and no longer sees her reflection but the story written in her eyes. For years, when I looked at myself, I saw wrinkles, gray hairs, a slightly bent posture, a body that didn't move like it once had. I saw the marks of age, but not its meaning. It wasn't until I came back from Florida and packed my suitcase and sat alone on the edge of my bed that I realized I had carried something else back with me. Not souvenirs, not sunburn, but a quiet certainty that I no longer had to apologize for simply existing. All my life, I had said sorry for asking too much, sorry for needing help, sorry for being sad, or tired, or emotional, sorry for aging, sorry for not dying quickly enough to stop being an inconvenience. But that day, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, no more apologies for being human, for having a voice, for surviving. In the days that followed, I started doing things differently. I said no more often. I said yes only when I truly meant it. I stopped answering calls I didn't want to answer. Stopped opening doors I had closed long ago. Stopped explaining myself to people who had never really listened. I went to the pharmacy one morning, and the man cut in line in front of me. Normally, I would have lowered my gaze, pretended I didn't mind. But that day, I raised my voice. Excuse me, sir. I've been waiting. Please don't disrespect me. He looked surprised, but he stepped back, and I felt 10 feet tall. I started dressing for myself. I wore red again. I put on lipstick without thinking I looked foolish. I even wore heels one slow once, but still, at group, I shared parts of my story I had never dared to before, about how my first boyfriend hit me once when I was 17, about how I lost my baby girl before Tomas was born and never told anyone, about how I used to cry in the kitchen while making dinner, wiping my tears so no one would see, and instead of judgment, I received hugs, understanding, a chorus of me too. We weren't just women. We were mirrors of each other's wounds. One afternoon, Martin came by with new documents. We recovered the last property. Estella, it's yours again. He smiled like he had delivered a miracle. But I smiled gently and said, I don't need it. Donate it to the shelter for women. They need it more than I do. He looked at me, stunned. Are you sure? More than ever. Because now I understood something I never had before. What was stolen from me was not just land, or jewelry, or savings. What was taken from me was the permission to exist without shame. And no court ruling could ever give that back. Only I could. So I gave it to myself. I started writing a memoir, not for fame, not for revenge, for freedom. Its title, I stopped apologizing. I'm not sure if I'll finish it. Maybe someone else will. But every page I write feels like a weight lifted. I've learned that silence is not peace, that obedience is not love, that aging is not a curse. It's a revolution. Every wrinkle on my face is a chapter, every gray hair, a verse, every scar, a punctuation mark in a story no one else can write but me. And now, when I wake up, I no longer dread the day. I embrace it, because I'm still here, not despite everything, but because of everything. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd live to see myself at peace, I would have smiled politely and turned the page. I didn't believe in peace, not for women like me, not for those who had buried more pain than birthdays, more tears than dreams. But today, I sit in my living room with a cup of mate warm in my hands and sunlight spilling across the floor. And I can say it without trembling. I am free, not because the past disappeared, not because those who hurt me asked for forgiveness, but because I stopped waiting for closure from people who never truly saw me. My days now begin with silence, not the silence of loneliness, but the kind that feels sacred. I speak to God in whispers, not begging, not bargaining, just grateful. My body still aches some mornings. I still forget things. I still have nights when the memories creep in like shadows under the door. But I no longer fear them, because I've made peace with the truth. The past will always be a part of me, but it doesn't get to define who I am now. At the community center, I started leading a small circle called Women Who Speak. Every Thursday, women gather to share things they've never said out loud. Some whisper, some cry, some still say I'm sorry before every sentence. But I always begin the meeting with the same phrase: "You are safe now. You don't owe anyone silence." One afternoon, a young woman named Lucia, not older than 25, shared her story of abuse at the hands of her stepfather. She said she had read the newspaper article about me, that it gave her the courage to speak. She looked at me with wide, trembling eyes and said, "You made me believe I don't have to wait until I'm 80 to fight back." And that, more than any court victory, was my true justice. My memoir is nearly finished. The last chapter is called "The Day I Chose Myself." I write every morning, not because I want to relive it all, but because I want to leave a map behind for other women, for other Estelas, so they know that freedom isn't something you're given. It's something you take, even if it takes 80 years. Tomas never called again. Jimena vanished. And you know what? I let them go, not out of hatred, but because peace cannot coexist with bitterness. I planted a garden in my backyard, lavender, mint, rosemary, and every time I dig my hands into the earth, I remember that healing is messy, muddy, slow, but always worth it. The women from group helped me build a bench under the fig tree. We painted it bright yellow. It has a plaque that reads, "For all the women who thought they had no voice, you do." And it is enough. When I sit there, I think of all the things I once feared: silence, rejection, being forgotten, being too much. And now I know the truth. I was never too much. I was always just enough. And maybe, just maybe, I was born for this, to rise, to speak, to live. So, if you're hearing this now, if you've walked with me through these words, thank you. You are part of the reason I was brave enough to tell my truth. And I hope, with all my soul, that one day you tell yours. If you made it to the end, it means something in you refuses to stay silent. Comment below. I made it because I believe in healing like this video to show you stand with. Every woman who dared to speak, subscribe to the channel. And let this message reach those who are still afraid to rise.